As she said, we're recording in progress. My name is John Peltier. I've been using Excel since, well, off and on since version 1 on the Mac, but my Mac Plus only had a 1 megabyte of RAM and no hard drive, so I didn't get very far with it. I'll just start sharing my screen, and most of you must know who I am because you got my you read about this on the newsletter I sent out, and you wouldn't have my newsletter if you didn't know who I was. Let's see. I'm looking to share that whole window over there, and it's not giving me that choice. So I'll just share Excel, and away we go. So this is my, this is not my workbook. Let me find my COVID spiral chart workbook. And here's my spiral chart workbook. You know, we've been tracking COVID and the progress of the disease for 2 years now. I did a couple of webinars almost 2 years ago, just demonstrating to people how they can use Power Query and a few other neat Excel features to download data, make a dashboard, and then just click a button to update everything, and it updates for the new data. And I kind of got bored with that demonstration because, what seemed like such a severe spread of the disease at first has been swamped by recent spreads. And then I saw something online, and it's this chart on the left, and it was really the lead into a New York Times editorial. And what they did is they, instead of a big long, and by now it's a long as wide as your screen, timeline of the progression of the disease, now they wrapped it in a spiral. And there's many reasons you might wrap it in a spiral. If there's a seasonal thing, you would wrap it in a spiral. So we're starting with the first of the year is the vertical position. And if there's any seasonality, you would expect to see bulges in this graphic at the same points along the spiral. And I'm not so sure I see that, but whatever. It's an interesting way to present data. This chart has gotten a lot of criticism. First of all, there's a lot of people that don't like circular charts. There's a whole group of people that don't like pie charts. And I'm a subset of those. I overlap, if we made a Venn diagram. I don't like bad pie charts. I don't use pie charts a lot, but they can be useful. And in fact, I use one here in my spiral chart, and I'll show how. And then there were some other things. I mean, this was a highly photoshopped kind of chart because it's not really a spiral. And one of the criticisms is that it's not a spiral and it's off center and so forth. And well, that's that. But I saw this, and somebody was saying, oh yeah, he made a chart in Excel doing that. And I posted back to him, oh, I'd like to see your workbook. I never heard anything, crickets, but I decided, oh, I can do that. I've been doing Excel charting for a while. I'm pretty good at it. And so this is the Excel chart that I came up with. And there's not enough labels here to explain everything, but it kind of shows the high parts of what might make a good visualization. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to post in the chat window. I keep posting a link to the workbook that I'm using here. The way the workbook is organized is every step of building this chart, I have a workbook, a worksheet. And then the next step, I start with that and I add more stuff. So if I add another column of data, I show that. And then for each of the steps, I have 2 separate sheets, and one of them is kind of a starting position and one of them is a finish position. And if you miss what I'm doing, you can look at the finish position and try to reverse engineer it. This is going to be a long demonstration. It's going to take at least the 90 minutes that I set aside. So I'm just going to get going. So getting data. The first thing when you're doing a chart, is to find data. And this cell for some reason keeps blanking out. There's this website I found. It's for the CDC, and as a matter of fact, oh, here it is. I don't know if you can see that screen because it says it was sharing Excel. Anyway, the link to the CDC is just, just their web page, and on it is a link to export a file. And your choices there are CSV for Excel, or a bunch of other formats. And so the first time I did this, I just downloaded the CSV file, and I used Power Query to import that into Excel, because if you just open a CSV file in Excel, you might get all kinds of other stuff. And so I'm going to paste the link again. And let me there's still a couple more people in the waiting room. So anyway, the first time I did this, I did it based on the downloaded file. Then I realized, well, I might be able to just link directly to the file in Power Query, and that's what I'm going to do. And if you folks have used Power Query already, you're probably already better at it than I am. But what I'm going to do is just show the basics of Power Query. If you've never used Power Query, look at this and then go and play with it, because it's great stuff. So I'm going to copy the cell that has the link to the CSV file online, and click on data. And you don't see Power Query anywhere on data, but Power Query corresponds to this this first block of commands here, and it says get data, get and transform data. That's what Power Query does, is it gets data, transforms it. It might get it from somewhere else in your worksheet, it might get it from a local file, it might get it from the internet, it might get it from some database connection, all kinds of things. And if you just click get data, you see that there's all these different options from a file, and from different kinds of files, from database, from you name it. But some of the important ones are just here with their own buttons. And so this is an internet file, so I'm going to get it from the web. And it pops up a little dialog. Sometimes it takes a moment, and I'm going to paste the URL right in here where it says to paste it. And since this is a wide open website, you don't have to go through any kind of authentication or anything. And here's what the file looks like. And we see there's a column for date, there's a column for state. This has data for the US by state, by day. And if you, somebody asked me about do I know where to find a file for Australia? No, I don't, but Google found me this one, so Google can probably find you one. One of my favorite programming tools is Google. And so it has a whole bunch of other columns here, cases and deaths and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's the one I want. So I'm going to take that file and process it. So you don't want to just load it. If you just load it, it's just going to dump it directly into the worksheet. And I just want to clean it up a little bit first. So I'm going to click on transform data down on the bottom, and it's going to open up the Power Query editor. And it tells me, okay, this preview might be old. I don't care about this yet. I'm looking at the file, and I see submission date. That's right. State. That's good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep date. I'm going to keep state. So I'm going to control click on the state header. I don't care about all these things. I care about new cases. Those are the new cases reported that day, not a cumulative number of cases. And then I'm going to scroll over, and I'm going to find, I'm not even going to use the new death data, but I'm keeping it because if you have it there, then you can adjust your analysis later. So I'll just control click on that, and none of these other columns look interesting to me. So I'm going to right click on one of them, and I'm going to say remove other columns, and that's going to leave me with this this nice list. And I'm just going to clean up some of the headings here. I'm going to call that date. I'm going to call this cases, and I'm going to call this deaths. And I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to sort by date, and I'm going to sort by state. If you don't do this, you can always sort it when it gets back into Excel, but let's do it this way. And now I'm looking, and the data types look right. These are both numbers. That's text, date is text, date is a date. And I'm going to say, okay, so I'm going to close and load, but I'm going to close and load too. You have an option to load it somewhere in the worksheet, or you can load it to the workbook's data model. And I'm just going to load it right in the worksheet so I can see it and play with it. And I'm going to hit enter. And now it's getting data. Now it's getting the actual live data that's available today. So it should have data including up to yesterday. And now we see it starts in January 22nd, 2020. That's the first, I guess that's the first day we had a recorded death. I don't know. And then I'll use control and the down arrow to see what the last data is, and 1/16/2020. So that's 2 days ago. So they haven't updated it with yesterday's data yet. That's okay. And so here's my data. And if I want to just check and see if it's what I expect, I'm just going to make a little data range here, and I'm going to chart it just to see if it looks right. So date, I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to say unique, because I only want the date to appear once. Unique is one of these new dynamic array formulas. And what it'll do is if I enter an array, it'll just give me each item that's in the array once. So instead of having 1/22/2020 50 something times for all the states and territories that are included in the US, it's just going to give me each date once. So there, and I'm going to hit enter, and here's my unique dates. And of course, Excel treats it, a date internally, it's just a number. So what I need to do, I'm going to control shift down to select that whole group of dates, and then control hit the dot twice to get up to the top, and I'm going to apply a short date format. And so here's my dates, and that looks right. And now for cases, I'm going to say equals sum ifs. I like sum ifs better than sum if, because I always think of something later that I also want to include inside the ifs. So it works fine if there's just one. So the range I'm going to sum is my cases. And my criteria range is the date here. And the criteria itself, it should be criterion, but you know, Microsoft doesn't know Latin. And I'm going to say this date right there. And I'm going to close that, and I'll say enter. And that's how many there were total on 1/22. So there weren't any yet. That's when they started the database. Now I want to get it for the whole thing. And I could take this and I could double click to fill it down as far as I have dates next to it. But since this is a dynamic array formula, I can refer to it. Instead of saying F5, I can say F5 hash. And that means use all the data in that array, in that dynamic array, in my cases. And I do this, and now here's my expected thing, and it goes all the way to the bottom. And so now, just to make sure this looks reasonable, I'm going to come here, insert the line chart, and there we go. And I'm going to do other stuff later, because everybody uses a 7-day moving range, because reporting goes to hell on weekends and so forth. But anyway, so there's the data. It looks good. So this is the data I'm going to use. Actually, this is the data I'm going to use. This is the real one for there. And I actually have a moving average formula here, which is similar to the one I'm going to use. How do I plot a spiral? Well, you plot it with polar coordinates, which means you need an angle and you need a radius. And I'm going to use an angle which starts at 0 at the top, January 1st, and goes all the way around. July 1st is at the bottom, or it's near the bottom, because it's not exactly 182.5 days or whatever. And then back up to 360 at the top. So it's kind of the reverse of the way trigonometry works, but that just means we use sine instead of cosine and so forth. No big deal. Most of the math that I ever have to use in Excel is pretty easy. A lot of algebra, which fortunately I can sort of plot out in my head, and a lot of trig, usually not worse than sines and cosines. So what I'm going to say is, how many circuits do I want this spiral to be? How many years, for example? How many points in each circuit? How many points in a year? what the spacing is. That means how much bigger the spiral gets each time around. And offset, I'll explain in a minute. So let's just, for now, let's say 2 circuits. So I'm going to do 2 years, 2 cycles of the spiral. And I'm just going to do 12 items per circle, and I'm going to increase it by 10 units each time around the circle. So I need to do an index. And for an index, I'm going to use sequence, which is another one of these great dynamic array formulas. And I'm going sequence, it's there. I'm going to hit tab. How many rows do I want? I want 2 circuits times 12 per circuit plus 1, because of course we start and end on the same point, so we need 1 more than those number of points. So I'm going to hit enter, and I go from 1, 12 is next to 1 at the top, and then 13 lines up with 1, then we go all the way around 24, 25. So there's my 2 cycles. My angle, I need to go from 1 to 13 to 25. It's going to be to 360 degrees, or 2 pi, and then another 360 degrees to the end. So I'm going to use this number, and that number is going to be 0 at the top. So I want to subtract 1, and I'm going to divide it by the number of points in a circle, and then I'm going to multiply it by the number of degrees, or the number of pi's in a circle, which is 2 pi, and pi is just pi open close parenthesis, and I'll hit enter. And so now I start at 0, at 6, well 7 actually, which is at the bottom, that's pi, and 13, that's 2 pi, and then 3 pi is over here somewhere, and here's 4 pi. So that's right, they've got the angles right. Now R, I'm going to start at the lowest amount, and I'm going to increase it so that by the time I get to 2 pi, I will have gotten to this spacing. So the formula, and I always have a little cheat sheet here, don't judge me. It's going to again be this value. I'm going to add a hash, -1 times B4, which is the spacing. So the whole time around, it's going to get to the spacing, and then I'm going to divide it by the number of items in the circle, and then I'm going to say plus this offset, and right now the offset is 0. So here we go. We go once around, it should be 10, and twice around, it should be 20. Great. Now a little trig, and off we go. So I'm going to say equals this R spiral and hash times, and I'm going to use the sine of this angle. I got it in radians, which is why it's in pi's and so forth. If you have degrees, you have to convert it back to radians, but I don't have that, so I'm good here. And I'm going to do hash, and here's my values, my x values, and on my y values are the same formula basically. It's this number hash times the cosine of this angle with a hash. And now all I need to do, I'm just going to plot myself an XY chart. And here's my XY chart. In fact, I probably should have done it with dots, but you can see here's where my points are. I'm just going to make the chart big. So I'm going to make it 6 by 6. And here's my spiral. And point 1 is here. And if we count the points, here's point 13. And you see, here's my 10, my spacing. And again, my spacing is 20. And the offset, well, let's say I make my offset 5. That means I start out with my first point at 5. And then I add 10 and I get 15, and I add 10 and I get 25. And, you know, that's a nice little spiral. So let's, you know, 12, we don't have monthly data, we have daily data, but let's say I change that to 24. Let's see what happens. And you see it's a smoother curve. We can still see the notches in it. And we see also, oh, this only shows 1 cycle. And that's because if I click on this, I can see that the chart is only using still the original data I selected. So if I had the data in the table and table doubled in size, the series would use twice as many points. It doesn't quite work that way with dynamic arrays yet. I'm hoping Microsoft, and I can't, you know, if I could use a dynamic array here, I could put my hash, but oh, I didn't hold the shift down. Now that's just going to give me an error. You can't do that. So I'm going to say escape. But what I can do is I can use names. I can name this range, and I can use the definition of the range. Well, just watch what I do. So in formulas, I can create a name, and that name, first of all, I want to just scope it to the worksheet. A name is just a variable, and so I'm going to scope it to, see, I'm in simple spiral setup. So I'm going to scope it to this worksheet. I'm going to call it x_spiral, and refers to is just going to be Q2, but with a hash. So it will refer to that whole column, that whole dynamic array. And if I change this to 36 or 365, it will expand as necessary. And then I do the same thing for my Y spiral. So I'll call it Y spiral. And I'm going to scope it again to this worksheet. And I'm going to put a hash on the end of that. And now what I can do, I'm going to select this series. There's a lot of ways to work with the chart data. And I find very often the easiest way is the original way. Before they used to have an edit data dialog in Excel, you edited your chart data by editing this formula right here. People are afraid of editing that formula, but go ahead and edit it, and I'll show you how. See, it says simple spiral setup Q2 to Q26. I'm going to change that. Instead of saying Q2 to Q26, I'm going to say x_spiral, and it's going to use that name x spiral. And I'm going to use y_spiral. In fact, it's better if you, like I did here, I just typed it in all lowercase. Now I'll hit enter, and you see it changed the case to the appropriate case. And now this series will always keep up no matter how many points are in that range. So if I change this to 36, it keeps up. It made it even smoother. And if I change that to 3 circuits, see, now I have 3 circuits here, and I can do whatever I want with that. And so that's a very powerful technique. It gets tedious when you have to keep defining these things. And I will not do that in a lot of cases here, just because you've seen it once. You don't need to see it again and again, and I'll run out of time and I'll bore myself to death. But anyway, this is how you define a spiral. And that's great, but I'm gonna, instead, I want to define a spiral based on my data. So let's see how I do that. So I've set up a little kind of a control panel over here. And so my data is going to start, I'm going to say equals min, and I'm going to go back to my data. So it's the minimum of my, let me move that out of the way. It's the minimum of my date range. These little tool tips that pop up, they help you figure out what to put in your formula, but they get in the way. But you can mouse over it where you get the 4-headed arrow and then drag it out of your way. And then I'll hit enter. So that's my start date. And my finish date, I'm going to say equals max. And I'm going to come back over here and select that column again and enter. So these are the start and finish dates in my database. But those aren't the dates I want to use. The charts that I showed at the very beginning, the spirals, they all started on 1/1/2020. And they all ended, well, who knows when they ended, but let's say 1/25/2020. I'm just shooting here. And so these are the dates that it's really going to use. And these dates just tell me, let me decide how I want to start them. So if this actually, you know, well, whatever, these are the dates that we're going to use. So what I need is a column of dates. And so that column is going to be defined by, and then let me just set these up again. And instead of 5 and 10, I'm going to use 500 and 1,000 for my spacing and offset. And I realize I have them in opposite order than I did in the first sheet over here. I had spacing first, and here I have spacing second, but they mean the same things. And so now what I'm going to do is define my date, and I'm going to use that sequence again that I used. Sequence, what you have to tell it is how many rows you want, how many columns you want, what value to start with, and what value to increment by. And before, I only gave it sequence and a number. And so that's how many rows, and then by default, everything else is 1. But here I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm going to go equal sequence. And I'm going to do, it's the finish plus 1 minus the start. That's how many dates there are going to be in this list. And 1 column wide. And I want to start at my start date. And I want to step just by 1 day. And if I had left that 1 out, it would have just assumed 1. And here I go. And oh, and I got my date here wrong. That should be 2022. And there we go. Now, the first cell is formatted as a date. The rest of them aren't. And it doesn't really matter, but it doesn't matter to Excel. It matters to me. So I'm going to change that to a short date. And then there we go. So here's the dates: 1/1/2020 and control down arrow, 1/25/2022. Yes, that's what I told it I wanted. So that's good. Angle, what I want to do is set it up so every year's days are uniformly distributed around the spiral. So I came up with this formula, and it's a little bit ugly, and I have to refer to my notes here. But I start with the first one, and I think really I goofed that up, and I should say -0.5. It's not going to make too much difference. Let's just I'll say -0.5 minus the date, and I want to start with no, actually that plus is right. Date. So a date based on the year of what's in N2 hash. A lot of times I don't hold the shift key down, and I don't get a hash, I get a 3. So the year of that, the month 1, the day 1. So what it does is it says, I'm basically determining the fraction of the year from this date minus the first date of the year divided by the last date or the first date of next year minus the first date of this year. So it's going to be the date again of year N2 hash plus 1, comma 1, comma 1. So it's the next year, and then I'm just going to take this piece here, copy, and I'll paste it here. So this will give me a fraction of the year. N2 plus a half. And I wanted another parenthesis here. These colored parentheses are great because they help you figure out where you might have left off an important item. Does that look good? That looks good to me. Let's just see if it looks like a fraction. So I'll go all the way to the bottom, and that's almost a whole 1, and that's starting at 0 again. So it looks like I got my fractions right. Very good. And so now I need to turn that into an actual angle. So it's a fraction of 2 pi. So times 2 times pi. So there's my angle. My angle's good. Our spiral, I use kind of the same thing. So let me come over here and I'm going to copy this piece of it. That's the whole year. So copy, escape. Now I'm going to go equals. And again, I'll do n2 hash plus a half minus index. And what I want to do is subtract, really I want to subtract the first, but the way I wrote it first is I was just taking off the first one from n2 hash, comma 1 over that whole thing I subtracted. And then I'm going to multiply it by the spacing, how much each spiral increases by, and then I'm going to add the offset. And I'll say enter. So here's my R spiral. So my offset is 500. It should be starting about 500. That looks good. And by the time I get near the end, it should be around 2,500 for the year. Yeah, it's about that. It's a little bit off. You know, who knows? The reason I came up with this crazy thing instead of doing that number over 365 is because 2020 was a leap year, and there's that whole thing to worry about. Now for my spirals, I'm just going to come over here because I'm lazy, and I'm going to copy those trig functions. I tried to do it so that the R spiral is in the same column in each of these sheets, so I could take shortcuts like this. And then I'm going to copy, no, I'm not going to copy that. I'm going to insert myself a chart. Now here's the moment of truth. And so here's my spiral. And I'm going to, what I want to do is just, this was a note to myself, put my chart here. I'm going to drag it there. If you hold the Alt key down while you drag a chart or a shape, it will line up with your cell boundaries. So that's a nice way of making everything all nice and neat for all you anal retentive accountants out there. And this is coming from me, an anal retentive engineer. So here's what my spiral looks like. And tell you the truth, that looks pretty much like I want my spiral to look. And so now there's my spiral. Let's set up our month divisions, you know, our spokes for the background of my chart. And so in order to do that, you see the hint right here is pie chart. So what I have is a list of months, and each month isn't equal. Each month has a different number of days. So I have my number of days here, and February is 28.25 because sometimes it's a leap year, but most of the time it's not. And I'm just going to take that and I'm going to insert a pie chart. And here's my 2D pie chart. And we're going to Alt and drag it there. If you hold Control down, it makes a copy of it. And if you hold Control and Alt, it makes a copy of it, and it lines up the copy with the cell boundaries. And that's all fine. Let's make it big, 6, 6. And I don't need a legend there. That's not helping anybody. And what I'm going to do is format my my pie slices so that it just looks like the grid. So I'm going to Control-1 brings up the formatting user interface for whatever you've selected. So if it's a cell, it pops up your format cells, but it's this chart, so it formats my series. And I'm going to use for fill, no fill. And for border, the default is a white line, and I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use the second to the lightest gray over here. And let's see how that looks. Oh, and also, because it's in the background, I want to make it thinner. 1.5 points, that's 2 pixels. I'll use 1 pixel wide, and there it is. And it's there, you can see it, but it's not like the old style Excel charts that had black lines as grid lines everywhere, where the grid lines showed up more than the data lines themselves. And so I need 2 other things here. I don't want to show this line around the outside, and I want to put data labels on my chart around the outside. And I can add data labels here, and I'll do it like this. I'll I'll add data labels, and then I have to come over here, select them, and I want to show category name, which is month, not value. But I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to do it the same way that I'm going to hide that line. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to combine this pie chart with a donut chart. And the donut chart, I'm going to use a white border, which is going to hide this gray border around here. And then I'm going to use the donut chart for my labels. So how do I do that? I'm going to select this, copy. And now I want to paste that, but I always use paste special when I'm pasting data in a chart, because Excel always has a different idea than I do how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to do Alt ES, which is half of Mr. Excel's hint this morning. And I check this and I want to add it as a new series. Series names in first row, right? The series name is month, sure. Categories in first column, that are the month names. And I'll say, okay. And when I first added it, Excel added it as another pie chart series. And if you try to plot multiple series on a pie chart, all you see is the first one is a pie chart and the other ones are somewhere in the ether. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the pie chart that I can see, and I'm going to right click on it, and it says change series chart type. And I get a list here of the different series in my chart. And they both say pie, but I'm going to change that to donut. And you get a little preview here, and that's getting closer to what I want. And I'm going to say, okay, also they spelled donut wrong. There's too many letters there. So here's my donut chart. Let's format that. I'm going to give it no fill, just like before. I'm going to use a solid line. I'm going to use white, and I'll make it 1.5 points, because sometimes when they're the same size, because of the anti-aliasing and so forth, you might see a hint of the gray here and there. So I'm going to change that. And then the last thing I'm going to change about my donut here is I'm going to change the donut hole size. I'm going to make it as big as possible, which is 90%. And finally, I'm going to add data labels to my donut. And let's come over here and format that. And I'm going to not show value, I'm going to show category. And I never show leader lines. I mean, if you don't drag them anywhere, it doesn't matter. But so here's the basis for that chart. So what I'm going to do now is overlay that spiral on top of this. So how do I make a spiral chart? Well, here's that donut chart. And the data for my donut chart is way over here. And here's all the stuff that I calculated before when I was showing the spiral. So I'm just going to take this data here. I'm going to copy. I'm going to select my chart. And I'm going to, again, use paste special, Alt ES. This is from the old Excel 2003 and earlier menu system. E was edit, and Alt ES, S must have been special for paste special. And what I want to do is not paste it as new points, but as new series. Series names in first row, which is just going to say Y spiral. Categories in first column, those are the X values. And I'll say, okay. Well, what it does first is Excel says, okay, the last series in the chart is a donut. So I'm going to add that data as another donut. And that's not quite what we want, is it? But again, we know how to deal with combination charts now. We right click on one of the series, change series chart types. And again, we get a list of all the series in the charts, and see it thought that Y spiral should have been a donut, and that's wrong. Well, first thing I want to do is put the donut chart back on the primary axis with the pie chart. And that changes the appearance slightly, but that doesn't matter. And then now this donut here, I'm going to change that to an XY chart. And that one there. And you see that sort of looks like what we want. And I'm going to say, okay. And there's my combo chart. It's not perfect yet. It's not done yet. I'm going to add some other things, but I'm going to point out some stuff here. The center of my calendar, my pie chart, is where all these lines come together here. The center of my XY chart is different from that. See where it says 0? That's my horizontal axis. And see where this says 0? That's my vertical axis. They don't align. And what I want to do is make them align. And of course, what I can do is I can select my axis, come over here, Control 1, did it not? I still have people in the waiting room. Look at that. So I can select my axis and do Control-1. What is going on? I think, so I'm going to format the axis. I think Zoom must have a Control-1 shortcut of its own. I can change my minimum and maximum so that they're all the same on both axes, and then it'll line up. But then if my data changes, if I add another year, now then I have to go back in and change it, and that's inconvenient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this chart and I'm going to add one more series that's going to make that work. I'm going to make it work with Excel's automatic axis scaling. So what that means, I have my data here. I'm going to figure out a value that if I add it to the chart, it's going to affect all the axes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the maximum X and Y value in that spiral, and I'm going to apply it to the maximum and minimum of the X and Y axes. So what I'm going to do for my max here, I'm just going to go equals max, and I want to do the maximum of the Q2 and of the R2, both the hash versions of those. And that's the maximum value. And it should be slightly more than 2,500. And setting here is like the dates where I can add something else. But I'm going to do it a little bit differently. This range here, I have named square XY. So if I don't put anything in the setting box, it's just going to use that. Or I can put another value. I could put 3,000 and it'll adjust the amount accordingly. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say equals the max of this square XY. And this I want to equal that. So that point has X and Y values equal to the maximum that I have. And then down here, I'm going to go equals minus that, and then Control Enter. So now here is a point that's going to be the minimum of both of them. So now I'm going to copy that. Alt ES, series names in first row, categories in first column, and OK. And now that plots this line here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to show it with the markers. So you see one marker up here is the maximum X and Y based on the maximum value of the spiral. And here's the minimum. And if that spiral changes, these numbers are going to change, and Excel will automatically plot an axis that's a little bit bigger uniformly all the way around the chart. And if I want there to be a little bit wider margin around the chart, I'll pick a bigger value for this, 3,000. If I pick a smaller value, or if I have a value here that the max then exceeds, it'll use that max from the spiral data. And so that's what I'm doing here. And you notice I still have my everything in my control panel is following through. And in fact, this part here, I can put it somewhere off to the side. It doesn't need to be where somebody who's running the control panel needs to see it. But so there's that. And so now, see, that's where we are. And now it's time to clean it up a little bit. And so how am I going to clean it up? Well, first of all, the amount of space beyond this maximum and minimum is related to the major unit spacing of the axis. So I'm going to change the major unit spacing of the axis. I'm going to make it something ridiculously small, like 10. And of course, that gives me a lot of tick marks, but that's fine. We're going to clean that up in a minute. And I'm going to do the same for the vertical axis. So I have all of that. So now that axis, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide the labels. Those labels don't mean anything. I'm going to select none for the label position. And also I'm going to come up here, and for line for that axis, I want no line. And I'm going to do the same two things for this one. I'm going to set my line to no line. And then I'm going to set my labels to none. So that hid that. I have this gray. What the gray is all the grid lines that are so close together. So let me select some grid lines and I'll delete them. Let me select the other grid lines and I'll delete them. And that's pretty well cleaned up. And let me just take this dummy series there, no line and no marker. I call that a dummy series because it's hidden there now. It's there. It serves a purpose, not directly with the data, but with the way the data is displayed. And so now we're pretty well cleaned up. And then probably this line, we don't want to be just the regular old blue line. We want to make it look, that's really kind of our x-axis on our chart. And the y-axis is radially moving outward from that line. So let's make that look more like an x-axis. And what I'm going to do is select medium gray, and probably 1 pixel is good enough. So it's a little darker than the spokes. And probably what we want to do is make this a little bit bigger, not that much bigger. I was just thinking when I had it using the regular values, this line went outside of that spoke. And really, I shouldn't be tweaking it now. I should wait till it's done. So the next thing we might want, the original New York Times version didn't have it. I'm going to just go back to that. If you right click over here, you can see a list of all the different worksheets you have. And I'm going to come back here. They only show the spokes, and they're all different lengths. So they probably just use Photoshop or something to draw them. Mine, they're all the same length. And probably what I could have done is used more XY series to draw those lines and had them end at the appropriate place. But see, I have my spiral line, which my data is started with, and then I have some spiral grid lines that go with it. And so let's set up these spiral grid lines. Spiral grid line setup, and we'll come here. And so what I've done is I still have my pie chart data, but what I've done is I've added some ranges here for each of the additional grid lines. And so each grid line is going to be, I have 4 of them, so each one is going to be 1/5 of the way from the spiral to the next time the spiral comes around. So this spacing over 2. So the first one, it's going to be equals, and it's going to be this, and I'll use hash plus the spacing over 2. So that's spacing, I'm sorry, over 5. And that looks good. And then this one, and let me do, change that to absolute reference. And I'm going to take that cell. Let me hide this here. I know there's a shortcut to do it, but I never remember it. And I'm just going to go click, 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 and I'm just going to do Control R to fill to the right. So you see, I start with 500, 700, 900, 1100, 1300, 1500 is the next time the spiral comes around. So those are the R values, and we're all using the same angles. So now I just need my XY. And so XY, you see, I'm using P without a $sign for the R spiral, and O with a $sign. So if I copy this, it's going to use column O, but it's going to use the radius next to it. So let me copy that, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to paste it here. Okay, so now I got to get that in the chart. And I can go and I can copy this here. This is what I've done before. Alt ES and new series, series name in first row, bing. Well, that looks like a spiral, that's right. Copy, paste, copy, paste. No, you know what I'm gonna do? I built myself a little thing. It's one of the tricks in my my charting add-in, Charts for Excel. I'm going to add a series. And what add series does is it finds a selected series and it adds another series of the same type using the same X values, but using the Y values next to it, which isn't exactly what we want, but I'm going to click on that because it makes it pretty easy. Yeah, that's not what we want. And all this black stuff is data labels. So I'm going to take this, and instead of using this as my Y values, I'm going to drag it over, and I'm going to drag my series name over, and I'm going to drag my X values over. That's how easy it is to change the data that your chart is using. You just, by dragging like that. Now, another way of adding a series is I can write my own series formula. In this case, I'm not going to write the whole series formula because that sounds kind of tedious to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this series formula, and I'm going to select the outside of the chart. You can't select any element in the chart, just the chart area. And I'm going to paste. And it's going to not be series number 6, it's going to be series number 7. And instead of column X for the name and Y values, it's going to be AA. So let me change X to AA. And I'm going to change X to AA over here. And W, I'm going to change to Z. And I'm going to change this to Z. And watch what happens. There's another series. Nobody ever shows people how to do that, but it can make it a lot easier to add data to your chart. And then I'm just going to do that again because sometimes I think that's the easiest way to go. And I'm going to do, it's going to be series 8, and it's going to be AB, AB, AD, and no, not AB, AD. Yeah. AD. Oh, and I got rid of the $sign, but the Excel will fix that because charts have to use absolute references. So AC and AC. And look at that. There's my spiral grid lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to format them so they look like nice light grid lines. So that one is selected. I'm going to do Control 1 won't work, right? Oh, it did work this time. That's funny. So I'm going to format that series, and I'm going to format one part at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is make it a 1 pixel line. And then I'm not going to change the color yet. I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of those series. So if you hold the Control key and use your arrow keys, you can select a different element of the chart. So I'm going to do Control down to get to the other previous series. And I'm going to hit the F4 function key to do the same thing that I just did. With charts, F4 doesn't work with everything, but it works with things like line thickness. And now Control down again, F4 to apply the line thickness, and Control down again to apply the line thickness. It also works with line color. So I'm going to give it the second gray, which is what I used for my spokes. And I'm going to say, so I did it to that one, Control up. We're going to go back up the ladder, F4, Control up, F4, Control up, F4. And so here's my, now that's starting to look like an XY chart that's spiraled, around the chart. And somehow we got ourselves off center. And I think the reason for that is some of these values are more than what the square X grid. So what we have to do really is change that. So instead of being the max of Q2, let's say it's AC and AD2. And you see, yep, it got us right back where we needed to be. So that's good. And let me just make that 3,500. So there's a little daylight between the spoke and the month name. And again, you fine tune these things when you're near the end. I hope people are still with me. Now we want to turn this into a line chart. And the first version of this chart I did, if I go back to the beginning here, I didn't have these little bars sticking out. I don't know if they look like bars or fur. Basically, what I did is I just drew the line, which is the outer part of this band in the original New York Times chart. So that's the line chart I'm going to draw. And so let's go back to the line chart setup. And it's okay that I'm not going to use it. So now what I need to do is I need to get my daily values, and I'm just going to use the I'm going to use this date to look it up from my data table, and then I'm going to figure out my 7-day moving average, and then I'm going to figure out what the radius is of that, which basically is the 7-day average added to the R of my spiral, and then I'm going to calculate X and Y based on that. So daily, what I would like to do is just use the same kind of, let me find it here. I want to use the same kind of lookup, the same kind of sum if that I used here, and but based on the dates in the table. And so let me do that sum if first, and then I'm going to adjust that sum if for what I need to do here. So I'm going to say equals sum ifs, I'm sorry, and the sum range, let's go back to the data. Yeah, it takes too long to do the data that way. So sum ifs, daily cases, this is really crazy. Sum if daily cases, there we go. If the date, comma, and let's go back to where we were. If the date is this date, and so N2 hash, and I don't need this worksheet name prefix. It's just because I went to another sheet and came back, Excel included it, and we say, okay, and now these are the values. And I don't want, I have all these zeros before the database itself even started. So I don't want to include them. And then we have a bunch of zeros at the end after the database ended. So this is 2 days ago, the last data we had. And I don't want to show these zeros. That I want those to show as blanks. So they eventually have to look like errors, or like the NA error. So they're not plotted in the chart. So they're plotted as blanks. So what I need to do is, and it's not as simple as if the date is wrong, put an error there. What I ended up doing was, along with the dynamic arrays, there's a new class of functions, the Lambda functions, and that lets you do all kinds of interesting stuff in your formula. And I want to use a lambda here so that I get an error if my date is outside of the range of the dates that I'm going to punch in. But I have to use what's called by row, which is a helper function. So let me keep my sum ifs there. But I'm going to do something else first. So I'm going to put a bunch of spaces here, and I'm going to say equals by row. And by row what? Well, it's by row the dates, which is N2 hash. And then I'm going to say lambda. And the first thing in the lambda I have to do, this N2 hash gets passed into lambda. And so I'm going to say dates, and that dates stands for the N2 that gets passed in. And let me do it with lowercase. I always hit that caps lock button. So dates, and that's right. And now I'm going to do an if statement. So if and dates greater than or equal to the start date over here, and then comma dates less than or equal to the finish date. and then close the and. So if that, and I have to scroll over further to see my cheat notes. So if the dates are inside of that, I'm going to do some ifs of all of that thing, only not of N2 anymore because it's dates. And it's probably hard to follow. It's as hard to write it as it is to watch me write it. And then if the date isn't within that range, I want to show the NA error. And then let's see if we can. I think that's the right number of parentheses. Yeah, the last one is black. And it didn't do what I wanted it to do. By row, N2, lambda dates, if in dates greater than A4 and B4. Oh, no, A3 and B3. So the dates are always going to be between the dates that I want my table to be, but not the dates that I want my, so you see the numbers are right, except I still have zeros at the beginning and the end. So I have to change that to A3 and B3. B3. And now, yeah, you see, that means there's no real data here. And then here's where the actual data is accumulated. And when I get down to the bottom, there's some at the bottom that aren't real numbers. So let's go up here. So that's fine. Now I need a 7-day average. And to do this, I need to do the same by row kind of thing again. So do equals by row. And by row, what it basically means is for every row in the input array, you're doing this function to. And so by row, and now my input array is going to be this cell, actually that dynamic array, lambda. And they're not dates anymore. They're not, who knows what they are. I'm just going to say array. I could have called it counts or whatever, but I'm going to use now the let formula and define average as if error average offset array. So now what I want is a 7-day moving average from the array value, and offset from the array. So I'm going to offset it 0 rows, 0 columns. So starting from a particular value in the array, I'm going to count, I'm going to do an average of the cells, the 7 cells going backwards, so -7, and then 1 column wide. And if there's an error there, which means either I'm trying to, either I can't go -7 without going off the sheet, or I have an error that I'm trying to take an average of. So if there's any error, I want it to be 0. And then, so that's if error. Offset average. Okay, so average, I need 2 parentheses here. Good, so that is a green parenthesis, goes with if error. And then now I need to close the let, close the lambda, and close the by row. And there we go. I've entered too few arguments for some function. Oh, I know. Yes, because I didn't scroll over far enough. So I didn't tell the let what to display. So I'll put a comma here. And now what I'm going to display is if the average equals 0, which is what I showed here. If there's an error, put a 0 there instead. So now if that is a 0, put an A. Otherwise, just show the average. And I think now I got my parentheses right. Okay, so I have no average here because there's no data. Here, I don't have 7 points to average. Here's the first time I had 7 points. And then now we go along, and now let's go to the end and make sure it does it right. Yep, I have no data coming in, so I don't want to plot any average, and we're good. So now I have one more thing I need to do first. I have to figure out what's the maximum number of cases in a day. I can go equals max, and now I just need to find where are my cases, and it's really this one here, the maximum average cases. So and I don't want to show that either. I want to show if error. So if there's an error there, I want to use 0 to calculate my max. So that's the biggest number in that column. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use 1 million. Let me add one more 0 there to make it 1,000,000. So 1 million is going to be the difference between one time the spiral goes around and the other. So that scale is 1 million. So each of these lines is going to be 200,000. So my 7-day line is going to be equals my R spiral plus it's going to be the 7-day average that I calculated times the spacing divided by the axis maximum. And so that's the basis on which it will calculate my numbers there. And you see the first number I see is, we're talking 575 instead of 5 whatever. It's very small. So now my X and Y are the same trig functions I've been using all along. So I'm just going to copy that, paste them here. And it's a long way to go, but I have these numbers here now. And what I'm going to do is copy them and go to my chart over here, Alt ES, new series, and click. And there's my line chart of cases by day. And I'm just going to leave it like that because I don't want to spend a lot of time formatting. I want to get done in the next 15 minutes or so. And there's a few more complicated formulas I'm going to have to type. So how do I get a bar chart out of that? I have my spiral. I know how many points it is. How do I get a bar chart? I can't use a real bar chart or a real column chart because most of the bars that I want to draw on this chart are not going to be vertical or horizontal. And so what I'm going to do is simulate them with lines. So what I'm going to do is let's just take a small subset of this chart over here. I'm going to blow it up. And here's that small subset. See? And here's my spiral data. And here's the line chart that I plotted. And I don't know what's the matter with this. Okay, I think I know that shouldn't be there. That's I got carried away when I was editing this worksheet. So what I have is these dates, and so 12/1 is this date, and 12/1 is that point. So I have my spiral points, and I have the line tracing that. And what I want to do is connect this point to this point, and then the second point here to the second point here, and so on. So how do I do that? I start with my data, but I stack my X and Y values on top of each other like this. And then I sort them by date. So I start with a spiral data point, and then I connect it to a line data point. And then I start with a spiral data point, and I connect it to a line data point. And when I add that to the chart, I actually get a zigzag, because then I don't just connect my spiral to the line, I connect my line to the next spiral. So what I need to do is actually stack my line chart data, my spiral data, my line chart data, and blank cells, and sort them and I get this. So it goes from the spiral to the line chart, and then there's a blank, so there's a gap. So there's no line going back to the spiral, and it's only lines going upwards like that. And then I hide all the series I don't need, and I make the bars a little thicker, and I make sure they're squared at the end. And there's my bar chart. And there's that. So it's going to work out pretty well. So now let's actually set this up. And now, of course, this whole thing, it's not going to be any good if you have to find your data and stack it up yourself and then sort it manually. Because when the data changes, or when the data expands, or when anything happens, you don't want to be stuck here for an hour doing copy, paste, sort. So what we're going to do is we're going to write some dynamic arrays to build these columns for us. And instead of blanks, we're going to use the NA error, which is essentially the same as a blank by default. So let's see how that's going to work. I got all the same helper stuff here. Here's my line chart. And let's come over here. And what I did here is I'm actually using X line and Y line, the names in my chart, and that's going to make it easy to change this now. And so let's just go see what we got to do. What I need is basically 3 items here. I need a counter. That's how many different points there are. That's how many rows I need in this table. And this is only from December 1st to 10th. And really, we need to do it for the whole data set. So for my counter, I'm going to just use equals sequence. And I'm just going to use regular numbers. So the number of rows I need is 3 times the number of data points in my chart. So 3 times. And let's just come back over here, and I'm going to say rows, and rows in my data. N2 hash close enter. And I don't know why, but this has given me, it didn't give me errors in the main chart, in the main sheet, but now it does whenever I enter it. Rows, it doesn't like rows of a dynamic array for some reason, or maybe it's just that one dynamic array. But if I use count, they're all dates, so they're all numbers. So I'll use count. That worked. Okay. And that should bring me way down to the bottom of the sheet here. So that's cool. Now my pointer, what that's going to give me is, so for each counter, I need to point to a date, and I need to point to which thing I want to return. So counter is going to be a counter that says 1 is going to be the first date, 2 is going to be the next date, and then no, that's counter. Pointer is a pointer to which date it is, and then I have something, I'm going to call it chooser, which is choosing whether to show the spiral data, or to show the line chart data, or to show the NA error. So pointer is equals int, and it's my counter, and a hash +2 over 3, and the +2 just I think no, I don't want to correct it to that. I know. So, and I added the +2 to make sure that this is the integral of the int of division of 1/3. That's not right. But if I add 2, that's 3/3, 4/3, 5/3. Each comes out being int1, int2. So the first date, second date, third date, and so forth. Chooser, I want to use a similar formula, but I'm going to use mod, and I'm going to use this number hash -1, 3. So the remainder, when I divide that number -1, when I divide that by 3, +1, so that I get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So each number here, pointer, has 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so now I just did that to illustrate what these show. I'm not going to use these columns in my calculations. I'm going to use let to get this counter into a formula, and then I'm going to define pointer and chooser within that formula, and then we're going to get what we're going to get. So for X bar, I'm going to go equals let counter. And here counter is going to be this range hash. And I'm going to use $sign here because I'm going to actually use the same formula in both these columns. So that's my counter. And now pointer, it's the same thing that gave me this number here, but I'm going to say pointer, and it's a comma. And now I define pointer, and that is int counter plus 2 close parentheses divided by 3. Is that right? That looks good. And then I'm going to say chooser, and I'm calling it chooser because I'm going to use a choose function later. Chooser is going to be mod counter minus 1, 3 plus 1. So that's my chooser. And just to see if all of that seems to work out, I'm going to say equals choose. And I don't want to use 1, 2, 3 here while I'm just testing it. So I'm going to use 4, 5, 6. And how many parentheses do I need? I think that's it. Okay, so you see I have 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6. So it seems like it's doing the pointer and chooser right in that formula. So now I know for the third one in each, I don't want to say 6. I want to say NA open close parenthesis. And now chooser, I'm going to use an index. So my index here is going to be, I want to use the X value of my line chart. No, the X value of my spiral. So this Q hash, comma, and that must be of the pointer. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, index, and it's not Q3, it's going to be AC3, because now I want it's going to be the line chart one. It's going to be this one here, which this thing's in my way, as usual, AI2 hash, NA. And something is, oh, I didn't put a, pointer. I still got it wrong. And let's see, that doesn't look right. Well, maybe it does look right. Okay, so I had a spiral all the way into the beginning. And then somewhere down here, I picked that up. And the numbers are close here because there weren't that many cases. So I'm going to say that looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do, since my my counter, I used a absolute reference, and for my X values, I did not. If I drag over, now I should be looking at my Y values. So there's my data, and these are my X and Y values for the bars that I'm going to draw. So I have in my chart, like I said, I used X line and Y line. I'm going to here go and define my names. So formulas, define name. Let's bring it here. It's going to be X. One thing I learned while I was doing this, at one point I named some things X_1, X_2, Y_2. You can't use something, and I don't know if it's as general as any cell reference, but you can't use something like X1 as a name. you can use X_1 as a name, but when you put it in the chart won't accept it. So it has to be different than a cell reference with an underscore in between the row and the column. That really caused me some problems. So let's go down to bar chart lookup, bar chart setup, I mean, and we're going to put a hash. And so there's my X bar. And now I'm going to do Y bar again. All these silly things you find. Y bar. And we're going to do it to the bar chart setup and put a hash here. And so now when I come to this, I'm going to go back into my series formula and edit that. And instead of X line, I'm going to say X bar. And instead of Y line, I'm going to say Y bar. And there's my bar chart. It took a long time to get here, but I think it was probably worth it. And there's a lot of tricks in here that come in handy whenever you're doing charting. So there's my bar chart. There's some ways of making it even better. I'm going to add some data labels, and I'm going to do it quickly. What I'm going to do is move it out a little bit so there's a little bit more space after my last bar. And I'm going to say 125. And so that just extended my lines a little bit. And in fact, if you want it always to move ahead, I could have just used a formula like equals that plus 10, you know, something like that. And now if my data is updated and it includes 2 more days, then those lines extend also 2 more days. So those are just a little fine tuning, you know, kind of stuff. The other thing I want to do is the square XY. It should now AC2, AD2, is that right? We should actually be looking at, well, actually, yeah, AC2, AD2, I want to look at AIAJ. No, we'll leave it like that. That's fine. You can fine tune to diminishing returns, right? So what I want to do is add some data labels. So I want to add labels to the ends of these lines that just indicate what the level of each one is. And I want to put a label that kind of shows what the year is. So let's go over here. You see I've inserted even more columns. I'm graded inserted columns. So what I want to do is 0. Each line is 200 because the whole thing is a million. So 200, 400, 600, 800. And now let's see, I'm going to use a custom number format. So I'm going to do Control-1 on that. And I want it to say custom format. I want it to be 0 per day. Enter. Oh, you know why? Let's just put that in quotes so there's no complaining by Excel. And then these here, I want a slightly different number format. I want that to be 0. And then I want it to be 0K per day, that many thousand per day. And so this is the label that I'm going to put on those points. And then this is going to be, let's see, equals index Q2 hash. And see this rows thing, that's what I'm going to type in there and it won't work. So I'm going to say count Q2. So that's the X value for 1 per day. Is that right? Let's see, what's Q? Q. Well, that's what it says. So we'll keep using that. And so now each one of those, the first one's in Q. The next one is 3 columns over, 3 more columns. So I'm just going to come here, copy that formula down. I'm going to use Control double quote, which keeps it live. So I don't want Q, I want Q RST. And then I'm going to do it again, T UVW. Enter down, control, double quote again, WXYZ. And one more time. And that's going to be Z, and it's going to be AC. And it's going to be AC. So those are my X values. And I'm just going to drag over, and it'll give me my Y values. And I'm going to copy my X and Y values. Copy. I'm going to come way over here to my chart. I'm going to do Alt-ES, new series. Okay, those all look good. And here's my new series. I'm going to add when you copy data, paste it into a chart, your usual context menus are messed up. So what I always do is I double click in a cell somewhere, and then I come back to my chart, and then things are cool. So my context menu, format data series, I'm just going to add points. So you see that the markers, see that the points are exactly where I wanted them at the ends of each line. So now what I'm going to do is click on this little guy here, add data labels. But I don't want those data labels. What I want to customize more options in my data labels. So come over here. The position is okay for now, but I don't want X and Y value. I want to use value from cells. And now I'm going to scroll way back over here and select the values I want to use. And so here's my values. Here's my labels, I mean. And so now let me just hide the markers, hide the series line, and there's my labels. They're not exactly where I want. I might want to move them a little bit. Well, fortunately, I built this little tool in my charts for Excel, which has a move and resize thing. So since I selected those labels, the labels are selected here, all the labels. I could select just one label if I wanted, but let's select all the labels. And then I want to move them, and I can use my arrows here. And actually, while this dialog is visible, I can even use my keyboard arrow keys and move them. And that's what I'm using here. Oh, it only worked the first time. That's weird. No. Okay, so that's not working. I'm going to have to debug that, but I'm not going to worry about that. So now I'm just positioning it so that they're lined up pretty well with those lines. And now I have one more set of labels I'm going to do. And I'm going to type a date here, and let's try 1/25/2020. And I'm going to use about 1/12/2021. And the reason I'm doing these numbers like that is because of the way they appear on the chart. So what I'm going to do actually is put a label underneath 125 for the year, for this year, and then 125 would be way out here. So I'm going to use about 112, and then here I'm going to use about 16. And again, this is fine tuning and so forth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use XLOOKUP. And we're going to look up that value in that thing. And let me put $1 in front of the N. And in fact, I better put $1 in front of the AS, because I'm going to use it for X and Y values. And I'm going to put it under the spiral. So I'm going to, my return array is going to be our spiral. And let's see if that's going to be right. And oh, if I don't want the R spiral, I want X spiral. And then I'm going to drag the formula down too. So let me just put $signs where they're needed. And So let me drag it down, even though it's going to mess up my nice little. And you see, I didn't do it exactly the same here. So maybe this should be about 1, 9. Oh, 1, 9, 20, 21. So, and 124, 2020. And again, I'm fine tuning, but you see, they're all pretty well lined up. 1.5 might make that better. No, let's keep it 1.6. And then now I'm going to drag this over. And now what I want my label to be is the year of what's there. So this is the label I'm going to apply with my same label from cells that I did. So let's just copy this, copy that data. And I'm going to Alt ES. That looks good. And let me just double click out here to get rid of that stupid copy thing. And I'll show the labels. Let's see, format the data series, markers, show the markers. So the markers are about where I wanted. And now I want to add data labels using the more options. And they're in the wrong place. I want them below, but I can do that through the options. I want them below, and I don't want to show leader lines or X values. I want to show value from cells. And the value from cells are just those values. Enter. And how did that come out? Looks good. I'm going to hide this series. So you hide it by saying no line, no markers. I do this all the time using a dummy series to put labels somewhere. I can fine tune the position there if I want. I might want to move them up a little bit. That's not too bad. And format them however. I think there's only one embellishment left. I have gone a little further than I thought, but not as far as I feared. So it might be even better if we can format each year separately. And that's conditional formatting of a chart. You can't conditionally format a chart the same way you can conditionally format a range of cells. But the way I do it is by creating one series for each condition I want to show and add them to the chart. And so I'm going to have one series for 2020, one series for 2021, and one series for 2022. And I'll replace this one series that shows all of them by those 3 series. And so here's how the setup looks. This is what I ended with. See, I embellished too much as usual. So what I had before, I had counter X bar and Y bar. And now what I want to do is split Y bar into a column for 2020, 2021, and 2022. And that's easy enough now. I can say equals if. I don't need to use by row or anything else. I thought I would have to, but I didn't. Year, index. And then I'm going to use the dollar into hash, which is the column that had the year numbers in it. And then I'm just going to define my pointer, which was int of $AL2 plus 2 over 3 so that's index that closes year. Okay, so if that equals A01, which is 2020, then I'm going to show AN2, and I'm going to do $AN2 hash, or I'm going to show NA. So I started out in 2020, and those all show up. At some point where it becomes 2021, those will be all NA. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drag this over to fill it. Now I have NA for these because it's 2020. And now when I drag down a ways, now it must be 2021. So that column shows. And then way near the bottom, it's 2022. And so what I'm going to do is use the same X values for all of those, but use just the filter. It's like filtering the Y values. So I'm going to come over here. And so now, instead of using Y bar and X bar, what I should probably do, and I'm going to do it just for this one. I'm not going to bother for the other one because it'll just take too long. But formulas, I'm going to define a name, and I'm going to call it. And I tried. This is where I learned about I called it Y underscore 2020, and the chart didn't like it, so I had to change it to Y bar 2020. And I'm going to apply it only to this particular sheet, and I'm going to put a hash there, and I'll say enter. And now let's come back to the chart. And instead of saying Y bar, I'm going to say Y bar 2020, and I'll say enter. Oh, isn't that interesting? Y bar 2020. Let's control F3 pops this up. Where's Y bar 2020? Oh, Y 2020 bar. That explains it. Y 2020 bar. And see, there's Y 2020 bar. And now I should have named Y 2021 bar, Y 2022 bar, but I didn't want to go through that whole exercise. But you see, this is the series that is, and let me drag that there. This is the series that is displayed. I'm going to use my add series function here as an easy way of adding another series. So if I select that series and add series, it's going to use the same X values, and it's going to use the next column for the Y values and for the series name. So let me click on that, add series. And look at that, I got my series here. I have all these stupid labels. And then I'm going to select that series, and I'm going to do it one more time. I don't know what happened there. Series 13. I really don't know what happened there. Let's see what it points to. AY11, AY13. Oh, look at that. All right, that's when I don't specify a series, it finds the last series in the chart, and that wasn't right. So let me delete that. I must not have clicked on this series. Okay, now I've clicked on that series, and I go back and I add a series, and there's the ones I want. And let me just get rid of those darn labels. And so here it is now. It's shows separate colors for separate years. And of course, these probably aren't good colors to use. You might want to take them that go more of a progression, either from lighter to darker shades of a color, or something like yellow, orange, red, or whatever you want to do. All right. So basically, that's Resize that people stuck around so long. I guess I can keep it open for 15 minutes or so, and if anybody has questions or comments, stick it into the chat window, and we could probably even open up for some. We can open microphones. We can't do it for too long because my throat is already dry, and that was only 2 hours, less than 2 hours.
Hey, John.
Yes, Carlos.
Hey, John, I'm amazed. I'm I was checking out if it was possible. You know how you did the height of your bars is the upper bound, right, of the
Yeah.
original chart, the New York
Yep.
Times. If you also plotted the lower bound and then use arrow bars to plot the difference, would that work or no? I was just,
Error bars, that was the first thing I thought of, and instantly I realized, no, error bars can only be vertical or horizontal.
oh
So,
yeah,
so
right.
you
Yeah,
still
yeah,
need data points. But what I could have done, and I thought of doing it, and it's like, oh, you know what? That's way too much. But instead of using the spiral line, whoops, and the outer line, I could have calculated an inner line and an outer line, and then I would have had a bars that went the whole width of the ribbon that wrapped around the original spiral chart.
right.
But I decided just to keep it simple.
Yeah, which you can still appreciate. You can
Oh yeah,
appreciate the increase. No.
yeah, and I mean that gives you the same kind. Somebody referred to the original New York Times chart as the tapeworm of doom. Yeah, it looks kind of something like that. But it's funny because this chart came out and people were very critical of it. And I mean, somebody was complaining, well, it's not really a spiral because the way it goes, it's lopsided and it's off center and so forth. But first of all, it was the lead into an opinion piece, an editorial. It got people's attention, and you can't use it to see what the exact values are, and you can't see if this bulge. Well, it's hard to get precise numbers off, but if there were seasonal effects, you would pick them off right away. And you can still, and in fact, even these values here are inflated compared to these values. So, and of course, the longer we wait here, the taller those purple bars get. But I don't know. I thought it was a fun challenge and a fun demonstration of a lot of Excel tricks. Without dynamic arrays, it would have taken twice as many helper columns to do all these calculations. And it would have been less dynamic. Without Power Query, it would have been more cumbersome to update. It's and so all these tools, the Lambda, where I could define my my pointer and counter right within the formula.
Yeah.
Use those things. That's like, it's amazing in the past 2 years how much Excel has extended our capabilities to do things like this. And then of course, just the construction of the chart. Carlos, you've been working with charts a long time. You've done some great things. Didn't know you could combine an XY chart with a pie chart.
No, I didn't. Like, it never thought of me, but now I was like, wow.
Yeah, well, but
awesome.
See, it opens up, and the nice thing about doing that is when you make a pie chart. Well, let me show you the combo chart. Right, here's my combo chart. The pie chart, it's a perfect circle. And when you combine it with an XY chart, the XY chart is a perfect square. So it makes a lot of alignment trivial. And then, I just had to do the trick with the equal XY things to get the axes to always be, centered. But I mean, that's a trick that I use all the time. If you have small multiple charts and they automatically would have different scales, you use a trick like that with hidden data points so that the auto-scaled axes are the same in all your small multiples. And that way you don't have to go running around and changing each chart axis whenever the data has to be adjusted. Yeah, Nautilus, somebody pointed out. Yeah, that's what people were calling this chart, the spiral. It's really what I used was an Archimedean spiral, which just means it goes, you know, normally there's probably what's Bernoulli, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Oh, Fibonacci.
You know,
Yeah,
and
Fibonacci.
I
Yeah.
don't know how that spiral differs. But you know, you can use any spiral you want, and just the one I used is as easy to use as anything else. Okay, someone wants to see the file again, so let me post that link one more
Yeah.
time. Let me copy that, and of course, it's not pasting. Let me try again. Copy.
So just in case at the top of the chat, or it depends if the person
I
enter.
think if you join the chat late, you don't get to see what happened before. Let me find the shortcut. It's in my Google. Oh, somebody else pasted it. So actually 2 people pasted it. So thanks for helping out. I'm going to stop the recording. I should have probably stopped it when I got done with my stuff, but where is the recording? I'm going to stop the recording, and